Well, if you're into fantasy baseball, you know your draft is coming up, which makes this the perfect time to talk with our fantasy expert from CBSSports.com, our friend. We welcome back in Adam Aizer. Good to see you again, buddy.
Good to be back. This is my favorite fantasy sport. Forget fantasy football. I love fantasy baseball.
You love the analytics, don't you? You love the stats.
I love the hard work that you have to put in. And the thing is, with fantasy football, everybody in your league knows football, right? With baseball, if you follow it on a daily basis, if you read articles, listen to podcasts, whatever it is, and you put in the work, you will be rewarded. You will do well.
Okay, so let's do the work. I'm not just going to be asking you for sleepers and what your first-round picks are, because I feel like no matter how you build your draft, your first four guys are going to be able to help your team. So let's talk draft strategy, and let's start with the middle rounds, because I feel like the championship teams are the ones that get top value out of rounds 5 through 10. So which positions, let's just start with the big picture positions, which positions do you think provide that value in 5 to 10?
5 to 10 is a pretty deep range, but if you want to talk about, let's say, 4 to 6 or 7, those are some really important rounds. I think starting pitcher is very important there. You can get a guy like Cole Hamels, who is falling, and I think is going to have a nice bounce back year, could be a top 10 pitcher. Chris Archer falls there, and it's mostly because there are so many good starting pitchers, and when you see the value that's there in rounds 4, 5, 6, 7, you say there's really no reason for me to reach in rounds 2 and 3, so let's wait a little bit. Then there are 3 or 4 shortstops who are going to come off the board in those rounds. Troy Tulowitzki might fall, and I like him to have a bounce-back year this year in Toronto. And then you got these 3 youngsters, Xander Bogaerts, Francisco Lindor, who I'm probably going to avoid. I'm a little less sold on him, and Corey Seager. So I think shortstop is an area where you could really have it swing for the fences, get a big upside guy there. And if you miss on first base early, I like Freddie Freeman in the middle rounds as a fallback option.
Scary option, though, with Freddie Freeman because of the injury, and you never know what's going to happen with him this year.
Right. He had a bit of a wrist flare-up in spring training, but it turned out it was no big deal. He's hitting home runs in spring training. He looks good. He had a little bit more power last year than what he had shown in the past. So I'm comfortable with Freddie Freeman.
We expected Freddie Freeman to do, I don't know, I almost feel like I put Freddie Freeman and Eric Hosmer in the same category. Guys who we expect to make that next leap to the next level, but they just haven't yet.
They're not going to. I don't think Freeman's going to get to the next level. But first base is actually, it's very important because usually first base is a deep position.
Right.
This year it is not. There are 7 first basemen that are pretty much elite rounds 1 through 3. If you don't get one of those, that's when I like to take Freddie Freeman. And if you don't get Freeman, you've got Hosmer and Adrian Gonzalez and maybe Albert Pujols, and then you're in trouble. So get a top 10 first baseman.
Okay, you talk about first baseman. Third baseman, another one that's very top heavy. You got Chris Bryant, Nolan Arenado, Manny Machado as well. Do you have to get a third baseman in the first couple of rounds?
Well, Donaldson will come off the board first. He might be the 4th
I can't believe
pick.
I forgot about
Donaldson. No, but the other, I mean, a lot of names to remember in fantasy baseball, right? Then those next 3 are all in the first or the second round. Arenado, Machado, who we should talk about, maybe he's shortstop eligible in some leagues. That makes him a top 5 pick. In CBS leagues, he's not shortstop eligible. Manny Machado could gain that eligibility, but we just don't know when. And Chris Bryant, as you mentioned. I don't think you have to. I like going outfield first baseman with my first 2 picks if I can, especially in a 5 outfielder league. Never set in stone. You got to be flexible. You don't need.
But if you get that third baseman early on, you're getting power at a position that doesn't give you power, that has very top heavy on power. And at the same time, you're taking that away from your opponents too.
Yes, but Chris Carpenter hit, you know, over 25 home runs last year, I believe. Adrian Beltre, maybe he won't give you a ton of power, but he could give you a really nice year. Michael Franco is a guy you can get round 8 to round 10.
You hope that he becomes that guy.
Yeah, maybe Miguel Sano is third. He's not in our leagues. He'll only be DH eligible until about the 2nd week when he gains outfield eligibility, but some leagues you can get Miguel Sano. I think it's a position that's about 10 deep, so I don't think you have to get an elite third baseman.
Last year, Chris Bryant, Correa, Mookie Betts, Jose Abreu, they really moved themselves from that mid-round to almost like first top-tier level.
Okay, so this is what I think the theme of 2016 is. You look at all the young talent that was brought into baseball last year. It's very interesting in fantasy. So I want 2 or 3 high upside young sophomores, or not necessarily sophomores, maybe third-year guys. Now, with the sophomores, you got to be careful not to take too many because sometimes they slump out of nowhere, like Jason Hayward, like Eric Hosmer, even Anthony Rizzo to a degree. But some guys that could make the jump, Addison Russell. Now, he's probably going to hit 9th for the Cubs, and that limits the amount of at-bats he gets, limits the amount of RBIs maybe, but he's still a very talented player. George Springer. This is a 3rd-round pick, maybe a 4th-round pick. I'm okay taking him in the second round, honestly, unless you're penalized for hitter strikeouts. Most leagues aren't. He could give you 25 steals, 25 home runs. He could be a legit first-round pick in 2017. So Springer is a guy I'm targeting. Rougned Odor, I like him a lot. We talked about Miguel Sano. So there are a lot of players. And even later in the draft, you want to take a gamble on Jock Peterson, who is disappointing in his rookie season.
Right.
It doesn't mean his career's over. You know, he could clearly have a much better year.
But you're going to get that guy like in like round 19, 20, somewhere in that range. 15 to 20, something along
like
those. Okay, well, that's kind of what this is all about. It's about risk versus reward. And there are some guys that have real high risk versus reward. Yasiel Puig is a perfect example of a guy like that. Who are some guys that you think would be worth that risk? And how do you feel about drafting those risky players?
In any sport, I usually have the same philosophy. I don't like risky players or injury-prone players with any of my first 2 picks. But if I start my team with 2 good picks that I feel comfortable in, and they're almost always hitters, I'm hardly ever taking Kershaw or Scherzer or whoever the third pitcher, Arrieta, whatever. I'm usually going hitter with my first 2 picks. Then I can start gambling a little bit with some of my hitter picks. You mentioned Puig. I think he's a bit of a gamble, but round 7, round 8, now we're talking here. The reward is worth it. Because remember, you play the waiver wire all year. You can make up for mistakes. Carlos Gomez is another guy who's falling. And yeah, later in the draft, I don't mind how risky a guy is. If we're talking after round 15 or so, I don't care how risky he is. I'll drop him if I have to. I want upside.
We talked a little bit about position flexibility. Manny Machado, a perfect example of a guy who's a third baseman that if he's shortstop eligible, now you're getting third base power at the shortstop position. How do you feel about drafting for flexibility?
Depends on the depth of the league. It is really nice to have, especially in deeper leagues. And what I mean by that is, more players rostered, more players on a bench, more teams in the league. And that means that if you have to go to the waiver wire for a replacement, the options aren't as good. So there are 2 players in particular that I look at. Addison Russell, as I mentioned, and Starlin Castro for the Yankees.
There you go.
Second base and shortstop eligible. It really helps if one of you, let's say you draft Castro to be your second baseman and your shortstop gets hurt. Well, now you can move Castro to short, and you can look at the waiver wire for either a shortstop or a second baseman, so you don't limit your options. Josh Harrison is a stud in deeper leagues because you can play him almost anywhere.
Daniel Murphy, another perfect example of a guy who can play first, second, and third.
Yeah, those guys are really valuable. But I think in a shallower league, it probably doesn't matter as much.
When I look at a draft, I always like to think to myself, my opponents are going to be filling up on power early. So do you want to hop on that bandwagon? In those first couple of rounds, do you want to try to find as many power guys as you can?
Yeah, I mean, look, home runs are hard to find, right? It's a pitching league now. Runs are down. But we're finding this year that steals are really hard to find. The good thing with steals, though, is that you can wait until later. So I agree with your philosophy. I don't necessarily say I need power early, but I find that just so happens the power hitters go early. They're the most valuable players in fantasy. So you do want to make sure you take care of your home runs relatively early. For example, Steve, it's hard to find a 25, 30 home run guy late in the draft that you're going to be happy with. You could gamble on Chris Carter, but he's going to hit 220. Whereas you can wait on Billy Burns, on Delino DeShields if you want to fill your
Fowler's a perfect example of another guy who's going to be they're going to score runs for you as well, where those power guys are going to give you not only home runs, but RBI as well. So
well, let me tell you this about Fowler. I mentioned this with Springer, a power-speed combination.
Right.
There are 3 players who go in about the same spot. We're looking in a 12-team league, maybe around round 10 or so, around 9 or 10 in a roto league, whatever. Adam Eaton, Brett Gardner, and Dexter Fowler. I'm not going to call them power speed guys, but they give you some of each.
Just a little
Maybe
of both.
15 home runs, 25 steals, whatever. And it's really helpful. I want one of those 3 guys.
Let's talk a little bit about pitchers.
Okay.
What is the pitching stat that carries over from year to year? Because not everybody is going to be a Clayton Kershaw who you can count on, and there always seems to be that mix-mash of guys who ride up and then ride down based on the season and the bats that are around them and how the year goes. But is there a stat that you can rely on that does carry over?
Sports is unpredictable, right? We don't know what's going to happen year after year. So I would say strikeouts are the most predictable. You could see a guy's ERA fluctuate, and you could see a guy's strikeout rate go up or down. But if you see someone put up a consistent strikeout rate for 2 straight years, it's likely he's going to repeat that, and you know what you're going to get. And on that subject, somebody who strikes out a lot of batters, there's a good reason to believe that he could take the next step. I look at a guy like Danny Salazar, a ton of strikeouts, gave up a lot of home runs, but if he can keep that under control, and he still had a pretty good year, top 20 fantasy pitcher, you could be talking about a top 12 fantasy pitcher if he lowers the ERA a little bit.
Man, every time I go into these mock drafts, relievers and closers are going, starting in like, say, round 8 or 9, people are grabbing these relievers. When do you grab a closer? Because it seems like
not then.
year after year, those names at the top of the list continue to change. Why waste those picks on those closers?
The first thing you need to do is simple math, right? There are 30 closers at any given time, you know, not necessarily going to be the same names throughout the year, but 30 closers. So what you have to decide is how many closers do I need and how many closers does the league need? If you're in a league that's only starting 2 closers in a 12-team league, that's 24. That means you obviously don't have to rush to get them. And now if you're in a roto league where a lot of people start 3 closers, that's 36. Okay, now there's a little bit more urgency, so I need to prioritize closers a little bit more. But the thing with closers is they pitch 70 innings. Starters pitch 180 innings. Some pitch 220 innings. So they don't do as much to your ratios as you might think. The whip, the strikeouts, the ERA. So I don't really value them for anything other than saves. That's why I'm fine waiting. And I like job security. I don't want to have to play the waiver wire if my guy has a bad couple of days and I don't have to worry about picking up his backup. So I think A.J. Ramos has some nice job security. I think Sean Doolittle is a good late round pick. I don't want to wait for Fernando Rodney and Steve Cishek. I will target guys from 10 to like 20 in the rankings, try to get 2 or 3 of those.
All right. Let's finally get some of your late round pickups, because late round you can really get some genius picks up. You will look like a genius by the All-Star break if you take these guys.
Okay, it's a tough question.
Yeah,
there are a lot of names.
Put you on the spot.
No, look, there are a lot of names, so this is what I would say. Get a bunch of guys and hope that 2 or 3 pan out. You're going to be wrong about some, and that's fine. You're talking really late rounds, pretty late rounds. Patrick Corbin is one I really like. Now, the pitchers that start going in the middle rounds to the late rounds, Michael Pineda, I think, will improve from last year. I think he's going to have a better year. And then you've got all these sophomore pitchers. Steven Matz, who seems to go the earliest of this group. But Lance McCullers is falling because he's got a shoulder injury and he's going to miss some time. But that's okay. Put him on your DL. Draft him late. Taijuan Walker, Carlos Rodon, Aaron Nola. We'll see about Kevin Gausman's health. But there are just so many good young pitchers. I really like Corbin. And, you know, people are sleeping on Joe Ross of the Washington Nationals.
Okay.
It looks like he's going to have a rotation spot. I think he's going to have a really good year. Now, as far as hitters, Jock Peterson is another name that I'm going to come back to. In a league that rewards doubles and triples, you have to be maybe in a points league. Denard Span is a guy I would look at. And also get some prospects in there. But there are just so many good young players in this game, and they go pretty late, so you can take advantage of that.
Conforto, another good guy to get at the end of the year, or at the end of the draft as well. I mean, we saw flashes of him this last year in his first year with the Mets, and now in spring it just seems like he's picked it up where he left off.
Conforto is a really good option. Gerardo Parra is going to Colorado.
There you go.
That's another one that you want to look at. So outfielders, starting pitchers, those are late round picks. And that's so important because that means don't fill up your starting pitching and your outfielders too early, because there are a lot of late round sleepers that you want to have on your roster and you want to at least be able to put them in your lineup.
All right, you can subscribe to his podcast on iTunes. It is Fantasy Baseball Today from CBSSports.com. Adam Aizer, thank you so much, man.
Thank you. Great to be here.